And that, Stratego Zelarian, is the current valuation of your remaining galactic assets. Captain Aris Thorne concluded, her voice calm, almost detached, as a holographic projection of the Stellar Concorde's dwindling resource reserves flickered into stark crimson. To put it in terms you might understand, your capital is depreciating faster than a decaying stellar core, and your supply chains are beyond insolvency. We, however, see an opportunity for a substantial return on investment. My crystalline form thrummed with a low, desperate vibration. We, the Viridian hegemony, architects of the Stellar Concorde's intricate logistical accounting and vast strategic reserves, were being told by a human that our very existence was a failing enterprise. The 25th cycle was proving to be an epoch of humiliation. The Void Heralds, those consuming blights of biomechanical terror, had breached the Olaran perimeter, reducing worlds that once hummed with the rhythmic thrum of our manufacturing hubs into silent, barren husks. This was not war as we knew it. It was resource extraction on a galactic scale, conducted by an enemy that understood no concept of trade or value. The apex of despair and a glimmer of unorthodoxy. The Olaran battle wasn't a conflict. It was an execution. Our finest dreadnoughts, paragons of Viridian engineering, had charged the oncoming Void Herald tide, their particle lances burning lines in the void. But the heralds were less a fleet and more a cosmic blight shifting, amorphous masses of self-replicating horror. They didn't maneuver, they flowed. They didn't fire weapons, they consumed. As a dreadnought's shields shimmered, parts of its hull would simply vanish, reabsorbed into the encroaching swarm. The screams of its crew, translated by our comms, quickly dissolved into a sickening silence. We poured billions of credits worth of capital into Olaran, only for it to be rendered meaningless by an enemy that devoured raw material without adherence to cost-benefit analysis. Our entire economic paradigm, built on scarcity and the inherent value of commodities, was collapsing. Panic flared on the interstellar resource exchange. Shares in vital mining corporations plummeted to zero as their worlds were simply eaten. Envoy Kale of the Syrinx Collective had been the first to voice the unthinkable. Their bioluminescent tendrils pulsed with conviction as they stood before the Grand Strategic Council. Their chaos, strategos, is their strength. They do not merely adapt to scarcity, they redefine it. They build value where others see only loss. The unforeseen, humanity, had been quarantined for centuries, their chaotic internal market crashes, their aggressive economic imperatives in early expansion, and their notorious history as supply chain manipulators, making them anathema to our ordered galaxy. The very idea of relying on a species whose very existence threatened the pristine resource allocation protocols of the Stellar Concorde was unthinkable. Yet, what other options remained when our own strategic reserves were finite against an infinite maw? First contact, a wry awakening. The diplomatic craft, shielded more by desperation than genuine hope, pierced their home system's veil. Sensors blared not with static defenses, but with the sheer energy of vast, self-sustaining orbital platforms. These were not merely weapon arrays, but colossal, multi-layered industrial complexes churning with unfathomable power. Our intelligence reports had been laughably inadequate, painting a picture of a rudimentary civilization. The reality was a humming, interconnected ecosystem of production, a testament to a level of economic independence we hadn't conceived. The voice that cut through the comms was crisp, confident. Welcome, Stratego Zelarian. And thank you for arriving precisely on schedule. We've been monitoring your resource depletion rates with keen interest. expected you'd hit critical mass around now. It was Captain Aris Thorne, the human leader. She stood on the primary habitat's central hub, a space of sleek, minimalist design that radiated efficient power. Her dark uniform, though practical, seemed to subtly highlight her composed strength. Her hazel eyes, sharp and assessing, met Xylarian's numerous optical stalks with an unnerving directness. She offered a nutrient paste, surprisingly palatable, then gestured to a holographic display that shimmered into existence. The Stella Concorde's own military and economic projections, analyzed, dissected, with critical vulnerabilities highlighted in stark crimson. You're facing a species that doesn't understand trade. They don't engage in investment. They simply consume, Thorne stated, her voice calm, almost detached. Your reliance on fixed supply chains and traditional resource nodes is their greatest strength. They're a biological black hole for your assets. You knew, Xylarian managed, its voice vibrating with disbelief. You knew of our crisis. A faint, wry smile touched Thorne's lips. Strategos, we knew of the Void Herald's 5 cycles before your first fleet encountered them. We've been analyzing their resource acquisition patterns and projected expansion rates. Our own perimeter defenses operate on a completely different model. We don't just defend against threats, we analyze their resource demands and develop counter-strategies based on supply-side disruption. She then introduced logistics chief Lena Rostova, a human whose energetic, no-nonsense demeanor matched her leader's composure. Rostova's eyes, bright and analytical, seemed to constantly track data, even as she greeted Xylarian. Their metabolism, for lack of a better term, is astronomical, Rostova interjected, tapping a datapad. They're a resource drain on a galactic scale. Stopping them isn't about blowing them up, it's about starving them. Or, better yet, turning them into something useful. Useful? Xylarian's crystalline segments shuddered. Our motivation, Captain Thorne continued, her gaze unwavering, is not driven by galactic altruism. That's a poor investment. We've observed your declining resource availability for centuries. Your rigid adherence to predefined trade routes and predictable commodity markets made you vulnerable. The Void Heralds didn't just attack your ships, they attacked your entire supply chain. They're a biological black hole of assets. We, however, see opportunities. She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. We envision new galactic resource markets, ones currently denied to us. A strategic acquisition of materials from the conflict itself. The Void Heralds, for all their destructive habits, are remarkably efficient at concentrating rare elements. And frankly, a long-term investment in galactic stability ensures a future where our own prosperity can continue to grow. We'll be asking for specific resource concessions, of course. Recognition of our unique material processing systems. Perhaps even a few patents on our more efficient resource management techniques. This wasn't a desperate plea for alliance. It was a calculated business proposal, delivered with the chilling pragmatism of a species that saw a cosmic war as an elaborate profit opportunity. Captain Aris Thorne, with her sharp intellect and composed demeanor, radiated an aura of dangerous efficiency. She wasn't just a military leader. She was a market force of one, assessing the galaxy's existential crisis as a distressed asset ripe for revaluation. The unforeseen mobilization and the crucible of Sector 7G. The mobilization of the unforeseen was a spectacle that defied every logistical axiom the Stella Concorde held sacred. There were no grand fleet formations, no solemn, coordinated departures. Instead, their system buzzed with a frantic, organized chaos. Massive industrial vessels, once lumbering cargo haulers and deep space mining platforms, now bristled with hastily mounted weapon emplacements and augmented thruster assemblies. These behemoths moved alongside sleek, purpose-built combat cruisers, their hulls reflecting the distant light of the human sun. Zalarian watched from the orbital observation deck, optical stalks swiveling, struggling to process the sheer volume of activity. Logistics Chief Lena Rostova, moving with a restless energy that seemed to vibrate through the deck plating, pointed to a holographic projection. "Our capital ships are being integrated with high-capacity resource converters," she explained, her voice quick and precise. "Standard void salvage protocols are being repurposed for combat zones. Every piece of debris, every atom of enemy biomass, is a potential commodity. We don't just clear a sector. We reclaim it down to the molecular level." The unforeseen fleet was not simply a military force. It was a vast, self-sustaining resource extraction and manufacturing operation disguised as an armada. They weren't just bringing weapons to the fight, they were bringing the entire supply chain. The engagement unfolded in Sector 7G, a once vibrant mining cluster now choked with the grotesque, swirling biomass of the Void Heralds. The Stella Concorde's remaining fleet, including Zalarian's observation vessel, engaged first, their particle lances creating brief, burning scars on the Herald swarm. But the Heralds were relentless, their chitinous limbs and tooth-filled orifices consuming everything in their path. A Concorde dreadnought, the ironclad Valiance, let out a final, shuddering broadcast as its stern disintegrated, absorbed into the enemy mass. Then the unforeseen arrived. Their fleet didn't adopt battle lines. Instead, they plunged into the chaotic heart of the swarm like industrial harvesters. The sleek human combat cruisers, surprisingly agile, darted between the hulking Void Heralds, unleashing concentrated bursts of energy that carved temporary furrows. But it was the industrial vessels that truly baffled Zalarian. One colossal mining platform, the resourceful Endeavor, its forward drills normally reserved for asteroid excavation, activated a massive graviton field. It didn't fire at the Heralds, it pulled them. Thousands of the creatures were suddenly compressed, crushed, and then, horrifyingly, funneled into colossal intake vents on the ship's underbelly. Zalarian's crystalline form shuddered. They weren't just destroying them, they were literally processing them. Graviton compression into the primary conversion tanks. Rostova's voice crackled over the comms, a note of grim satisfaction in her tone. Estimated biomass yield looks promising. Initiating rapid prototyping on drone fabrication, 70% efficiency on recycled Void Herald matter. As the battle raged, Zalarian watched, mesmerized and repulsed. The humans fought with a terrifying efficiency. They would lure a thick concentration of heralds into a tight space, then a specialized human frigate would unleash a wave of sonic disruptors. The heralds writhed, disoriented, their internal structures cracking. Before they could recover, swarms of small, newly fabricated drones, ugly, functional things cobbled from recycled Void Herald chitin and metals, swarmed over them, dissecting them further, directing the valuable organic and inorganic components towards waiting industrial vessels. A Viridian frigate, caught in a flanking maneuver by a particularly large Void Herald creature, was about to be overwhelmed. Just as the creature's maw opened, a human transport vessel, designed for ferrying atmospheric processes, slammed into it. It wasn't a suicidal ramming, it was a precise impact. The transport's modified grappling claws latched onto the Herald, its internal systems activating a burst of high-intensity thermal energy. The Herald screamed, a sound that grated on Xylarian's sensory filaments as its outer layers began to cook and separate. Then, the transport activated massive internal vacuums, sucking the vaporized elements into its cargo holds. It wasn't just killing the enemy, it was stripping it for parts mid-fight. "That's our zero-waste combat protocol, strategos," Captain Thorne's voice stated, calm amidst the maelstrom. She watched the holographic battlefield with a detached, analytical intensity. Every loss can be offset by a gain. Every enemy consumed is potential capital. Xylarian's optical stalks retracted fully. This wasn't war as the Stellar Concord knew it. This was a grotesque, efficient, terrifyingly pragmatic form of economic warfare. The humans weren't just killing the Void Heralds, they were turning them into commodities. They were converting destruction into creation, waste into assets. Their military might was inseparable from their logistical and resource ingenuity. The fear Xylarian felt transcended the immediate threat of annihilation. It became a deep-seated dread of humanity's sheer capacity to redefine reality itself. Their methods were not just unconventional, they were existentially unsettling. They didn't just understand economic leverage, they embodied it. The tide turns and the cost of victory. The battle for Sector 7G, a sector the Stellar Concord had written off as an irreversible asset loss, became a grotesque laboratory for human ingenuity. The Void Heralds, previously an unstoppable force, were now caught in a bewildering trap. They continued to replicate, but the rate of their consumption by the unforeseen's industrial fleets began to outpace their growth. Human combat cruisers would strategically herd sections of the Herald swarm, pushing them into zones where massive, static collection arrays had been rapidly deployed. These arrays were not designed for defense, but for vacuuming up anything within their reach, transforming the chaotic battlefield into a controlled harvesting ground. One particularly desperate encounter saw the Viridian Crucible, a heavy cruiser barely maintaining its shields, surrounded by a particularly aggressive cluster of heralds. Its particle lances had expended their last viable charge. Just as Xylarian expected to see it vanish, a human support vessel resembling a repurposed refinery ship arced in front of it. It didn't engage the heralds directly. Instead, it deployed a shimmering, semi-permeable energy net. The heralds, drawn by the Crucible's energy signature, slammed into the net. They didn't disintegrate, they stuck. Then, tiny, specialized human drones, swarming from the refinery ship, began to move across the net, attaching themselves to the heralds. Xylarian's sensors barely registered the process, but the energy readings indicated a rapid chemical breakdown. The drones were acting as mobile conversion units, liquefying the heralds on the spot, and the refinery ship was drawing the resulting slurry directly into its tanks. The Crucible was saved, not by brute force, but by being used as bait for a resource extraction operation. Every conflict is an opportunity for market adjustment. Captain Thorne's voice echoed across the secure channel to the Concord command. The faster we neutralize the threat, the quicker we can begin the salvage phase and open up these previously closed resource nodes. Her tone was unwavering, even as explosions rocked the distant human combat ships. She didn't seem to feel the loss of her own vessels as much as the cost of not achieving the objective efficiently. Logistics Chief Rostova was a blur of motion, her hands flying across holographic displays. Projected yields from Sector 7G are exceeding initial estimates. We are seeing higher concentrations of xenobiotic compounds than anticipated. This could significantly impact our manufacturing throughput on the new drone models. suggest we pivot to a higher dividend distribution on combat-grade alloys. The Stella Concorde's admirals, watching from their own bridges, were speechless. They saw the chaos of battle. The humans saw a living spreadsheet, a dynamic resource map where enemy ships were not threats, but potential raw materials. The unforeseen didn't fight to destroy, they fought to repurpose. The very concept of a front line dissolved as their industrial fleet moved with their combat vessels, acquiring assets as fast as they were generated by the destruction. The aftermath and the new galactic order. The Void Herald threat, which had crippled the Stella Concorde, was neutralized in a matter of cycles. The victory was swift and overwhelming, with remarkably low casualties on the unforeseen side compared to the Concorde's prior failures. The remaining Herald swarm, instead of being annihilated, was strategically corralled into designated processing zones. Vast orbital facilities built by the unforeseen in days, where they would be systematically converted into usable commodities. The galaxy had been saved, but the economic landscape had been fundamentally altered. The unforeseen now held significant resource leverage. They controlled vast tracts of reclaimed territory, rich in newly accessible prime minerals, thanks to their rapid resource extraction methods. They had acquired unprecedented technological patents on their closed-loop manufacturing and rapid prototyping methodologies, which promised to revolutionize galactic manufacturing throughput. And through their strategic engagements, they had gained control over several critical trade routes that had been choked by the Heralds. These weren't just military victories. They were a complete reordering of galactic economic power. The Stella Concorde's Grand Council, humbled and desperate, formally lifted all quarantines and prejudices against humanity. Negotiations began for their full integration. This included new resource-sharing agreements, revised material sourcing regulations, and complex supply chain protocols. The unforeseen didn't demand tribute or territory in the traditional sense. They demanded a seat at the table, with terms of resource recognition, that forced the Concorde to fundamentally reevaluate its long-held principles of credit and capital. Their innovation credit system, previously dismissed as an academic curiosity, was now being seriously considered as a supplemental galactic currency for intellectual property and technological advancements. In the post-war debriefings, Zalarian attended a discussion with Captain Thorne and Logistics Chief Rostova. The humans, still pragmatic, spoke of the future. "Our past isolation," Captain Thorne observed, her eyes twinkling with a peculiar amusement, "was perhaps more dangerous than our current presence. Not just militarily, but economically. You saw us as a contagion, but we were merely a highly volatile market force waiting to be unleashed." Rostova added, "Integrating us will be a challenge. Our approach to resource growth might be disruptive to your existing credit systems. We tend to prioritize return on investment over traditional material ethics when the stakes are high. We see opportunities where you see crises. We optimize for profit and efficiency, even in the face of widespread panic." She gestured to a holographic display that shifted from strategic battle maps to complex graphs detailing projected resource yields from newly acquired sectors. The potential dividends for the entire Stella Concorde are astronomical, of course, but it requires a recalibration of your understanding of value. Zalarian listened, its optical stalks swiveling between the two human women. Thorne, with her unnerving composure and sharp mind, and Rostova, with her boundless energy and relentless focus on optimization, were two sides of the same unsettling coin. They were the embodiment of humanity's unique, terrifying blend of adaptability and ruthless pragmatism. They didn't just understand economic leverage, they were living, breathing engines of it. The Stellar Concord had gained an immensely powerful ally, a new resource powerhouse, but also an unpredictable, transformative force that would forever alter the status quo. The interstellar resource exchange, once omnipotent, now found itself consulting with unforeseen resource analysts who spoke of economic warfare and long-term investment strategies with a chilling pragmatism. My final thoughts, as Zalarian looked out at the reconstructed galactic map, now displaying the vibrant, ever-shifting lines of unforeseen trade routes and burgeoning industrial zones, were complex. We had been saved from an existential threat, certainly. But at what cost? We had unleashed a species that saw the universe not just as a place of conflict, but as a vast, untapped resource market. A species whose very adaptability, ruthlessness, creativity, and paradoxical traits had redefined not only war, but also the very concept of capital and resource allocation. The galaxy was no longer just militarily secure, it was economically revolutionized. And in that revolution, a new era of galactic economic competition had begun, promising either unprecedented prosperity or an entirely new kind of systemic upheaval. The unforeseen had proven themselves a force to be reckoned with, not just on the battlefield, but in the ruthless, intricate dance of galactic finance. And Xylarian, a creature of meticulous ledgers and predictable markets, could only wonder what hidden dividends or devastating losses this new galactic order would bring. The universe, it seemed, was about to enter a new era of interesting times, where volatility was no longer just a market term, but a way of life.